The truth doesn't need applause. I once sat across from an 82-year-old woman. She had just dropped her teacup and bent down, apologizing softly. "I'm sorry. I'm so clumsy. All my life I've just tried not to be a burden." I looked at the spill on the table and thought, how many in the generation before us lived kindly their entire lives, but never once lived true to themselves. In a world that listens only to the loudest voice, there's a group of people who've stayed silent for too long. They are the mothers who never complained, the fathers who always nodded, "It's okay, sweetheart," the elders who never said, "This is what I want," because from a young age, they were taught to live for others. Today, Bon isn't telling this story to make you feel pity. This is a story meant to wake us up, because there are truths that, if left unsaid while we're still alive, will disappear with us like a letter never written. If you have to pretend to be someone else just to be loved, then the person being loved isn't you. And if you've lived that way for too long, maybe it's time to find your real voice again. This elderly woman only wants to be believed she ever existed. Her name is Nora Thompson. She's 81. Lives alone in a third-floor apartment overlooking a parking lot where an old man counts pigeons every afternoon. There's nothing remarkable about Nora. She was never divorced, never caught in a scandal, never went bankrupt. She lived exactly by society's standards. But because of that, she never really lived by her own. I met Nora during a silent therapy session for seniors where no one needed to speak, just show up. During the break, Nora came up to me and asked, "Do you believe that someone can live 80 years and never say a single honest sentence out loud?" I didn't answer. Nora stared out the window, then quietly added, "I'm one of them." As a little girl, Nora was sensitive. She loved books, soft green colors, and once wrote a diary about a teacher she adored. Her mother tore it up because it was inappropriate. That day, Nora learned silence meant survival. Speaking meant rejection. She grew up and married a good man but never loved him. She had children, raised them well, but never let them see her cry. Nora was the picture-perfect ideal woman. But every night she'd hold her pillow and whisper, "Does anyone even know who I really am?" I asked. "Have you ever said what you truly wanted?" She replied, "Never. I got so good at reading what others needed and becoming someone they felt comfortable with. I mastered keeping the peace. So much so that I erased myself from my own life. There was no big explosion. Just little by little, I stepped out of my own story to fit into everyone else's. And then one day, I didn't even remember what I ever wanted. And that's where this story begins. Not with a tragedy, not with a miracle, not even with a dream, but with an old woman placing her hand on her chest and asking, "Did I ever truly live? A love that never dared to speak its name." "Have you ever been in love?" Bon asked. It wasn't a probing question, more like a gentle door cracked open only if the person across was ready to walk through. Nora was silent. She didn't answer right away. She turned her face slightly as if afraid her own eyes might reflect what she had buried for decades. Once she whispered, her voice barely a breeze slipping under the door. "I was in love when I was 22. Her name was Lucy." Bon said nothing, just sat quietly, not surprised, not pretending to understand, just present, a silent nod to the truth. "Lucy went to the same university as me. She wrote poetry, and me. I never imagined I could be drawn to someone like that." Nora continued. "They once sat in the library together until midnight. They held hands once in the dark. They bumped into each other while washing their hands in the restroom, and Nora's heart beat so fast it felt like someone was knocking from inside her chest. I never kissed her, never said it out loud. All I knew was every time I looked at her, I felt alive." One day, Nora's mother found a letter draft she had never sent, a half-finished poem for Lucy. She got slapped for the first time and was forced to attend church 3 weeks straight to cleanse her impure thoughts. I wasn't angry at my mother, I was more angry at myself. I felt dirty, wrong. Nora said she began avoiding Lucy after that. No explanation, no goodbye, no closure. Just disappeared. I used to believe that if I was good enough, normal enough, obedient enough, that the feeling would fade. But you know what? It never did. I just learned how to tuck it away in a place no one could see. Bond softly said, "Some loves don't die. They're just imprisoned in places the world says they don't belong." Nora nodded, gently, as if finally acknowledging a truth that never needed anyone's approval. "I married a man, had 3 children. No one ever knew. I fulfilled my duties. I never betrayed anyone except myself. A love that was never named was not a love that never existed. It was just a song silenced before its first note could play." Bond asked, "If you could see Lucy again, what would you say?" Nora paused, then smiled, sad and innocent like a child remembering their very first secret. "I'd say I don't regret loving you. I only regret letting fear be louder than that love." That night, for the first time in nearly 60 years, Nora picked up a pen and wrote a letter to someone who never received one. "Dear Lucy, I don't know if you still remember, but I've never forgotten. You were the only time in my life when I didn't have to pretend, didn't have to please anyone, didn't have to perform. I stayed silent not because I didn't love you, but because I loved the world too much and I was afraid of being erased by it. Now, I'm not writing this to apologize. I just want to give that dream an ending so it doesn't have to lie buried in the heart of an old woman who lived too kindly, but never truly lived." And so after 60 years, Nora didn't need forgiveness. She only needed to hear herself finally say out loud what she had held too long in silence. Faith silenced. There are people who carry a lifetime of scripture, but never once have they been allowed to speak with the faith that truly lived inside them. Nora was raised in a strict Protestant household. Every Sunday church service, every night a prayer, every decision asked God first. But when Nora was 16, she secretly read a book on Buddhism, and for the first time, her heart felt quiet. Not because she wanted to abandon God, not because she wanted to rebel, but because she realized something. I was never allowed to choose what I believe. I was only taught what I must believe. Bond asked, "Did you ever question your faith?" Nora nodded. "No, I never questioned faith itself. I questioned how people used it to control one another." Nora shared that when she was 30, after giving birth to her second child, she fell into a deep depression. She sought out a Japanese monk living quietly in the suburbs, not to convert, just to sit in silence with herself. But when her husband found out, he was furious. "Are you straying from the path?" he demanded. Her mother wept. "Are you betraying God?" From that day on, Nora stopped. She stopped meditating, stopped reading, stopped speaking about inner awakening. She wrapped up every inner voice in a polished, proper religious image. Every year, she still went to church, still prayed, still smiled, but she no longer saw herself in any of it. Bond wrote in his notebook, "Faith is not a memorized answer. It's a quiet conversation between you and the brightest part of you." Nora once said, "I used to wish there was a church somewhere that didn't require the right answers, only honest questions." She held no anger, no bitterness, only sorrow for having spent so long living as a model believer, but never once as a free soul. One afternoon, Bond handed her a small wind chime from a Buddhist temple in California. On its side was engraved, "Peace doesn't come from being approved. It comes from no longer needing permission to be real." Nora hung the chime outside her porch. The wind blew, the bell sang softly, and for the first time in nearly 50 years, she meditated again. Not to prove anything, just to breathe. In that stillness, she didn't pray, she didn't plead, she didn't offer. She just breathed as someone who finally knew she had been accepted by herself. Bond asked, "Do you think God would be angry?" Nora smiled. "If a creator great enough to build the universe exists, then surely he's compassionate enough to understand that I'm searching for truth, not abandoning him." And from that day forward, Nora no longer felt guilt walking past a church, nor fear when picking up a book on meditation, because she understood real faith doesn't come with a label. It comes from the quiet truth that lives deep within us, the dream that got buried. Bon once said, "Some people don't die from illness. They die because they buried their dreams for 40 years. Nora nodded when she heard that. I once wanted to be a writer. Not the kind of writer who seeks fame. Not to get published or sign autographs, just to write. Because when she wrote, she felt like she had a voice. When Nora was 17, she wrote a short story titled The Third Daughter. It was about a girl who was always seen as the easy one, the one with no problems, no drama, and then one day, she disappeared. No one noticed. No one remembered. Because everyone assumed she'd always be fine. The story won a school award. Her teachers encouraged her to apply for literature school. A professor even pulled her aside and said, "There's something deeply honest in your words. Don't let that part of you die." But her mother said, "Writing won't feed you. Women who chase writing only bring trouble. Study teaching. It's safe. It's stable." So Nora tore up the application, cut out her old poems, tucked her first manuscript in a drawer, and never spoke of it again. I didn't give up the dream. I locked it away. Bon asked, "Do you think your life would have been different if you'd pursued it?" Nora didn't answer right away. She looked up at the wall where her teacher's diploma still hung and sighed. "Different, I don't know, but maybe I wouldn't have had to pretend to be fine so much. I was a good teacher, but I was never myself." For 35 years in the classroom, Nora did everything right. She never let students see her anger, never let parents hear her frustrations, never made co-workers uncomfortable, and never let anyone know that once upon a time, she had a different dream. Bon asked, "Why didn't you write again, after your children grew up?" Nora gave a soft smile, her eyes heavy with quiet guilt. "Because I was afraid that I wouldn't know how to write like me anymore. I had lived so long in someone else's voice that I forgot what my own even sounded like, and that is the silent tragedy for so many people. We live peacefully for so long that when we finally want to live honestly, we no longer know where to begin." Bon asked, "Do you still remember the first line of your short story?" Nora closed her eyes, then recited as if it had never left her. "I am the third daughter. No one picks me first, but I stay behind to clean up all the silence." Bon softly said, "Maybe you never stopped being a writer. You just kept writing your story with an invisible pen." That night, Nora pulled out her old manuscript. It was still there, still folded in the same creases, the pages yellowed with the quiet weight of regret. She picked up a pen and added one line. 60 years later, I returned to my own story, not to finish it, but to remind myself I once dreamed, and that still matters. People don't die when they fail. They die when they forget what they once longed for. The cost of being pleasant. People often said Nora is the most pleasant person I've ever met. Everyone adored her. Neighbors adored her. Students adored her. Co-workers adored her. And of course, family adored her most of all. But Bon, the one sitting quietly beside her during that therapy session, was the first to ask, "Have you ever felt like you disappeared behind that word?" Nora froze. "No one's ever asked me that before." Bon looked straight at her. "Were you pleasant? Or were you just really good at making others feel comfortable by sacrificing yourself?" The room went silent. A truth had landed right where it hurt the most. Nora inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly. "I once skipped meals so others could eat the best part. Once nodded along with a decision I didn't agree with just to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. Once said I'm fine when inside I was falling apart. I used to think I was being kind. Now I see I was just terrified of being rejected." Bon flipped open his notebook and wrote, "Being pleasant is not a virtue if it costs you your truth." Nora continued, "I never said no. Not when asked for money, not when hurt, not when passed over for something I earned. I always smiled because I feared losing affection." And then one day, she couldn't tell where the line was between herself and everyone else. "I don't remember the last time I disagreed with someone. Don't remember the last time I got angry without feeling guilty. Don't remember the last time I did something for me, not just to keep the peace." Bon asked, "Do you feel loved?" Nora stared into the distance. I think they love my pleasantness, not me. Being pleasant is the most praised disguise and the most beautiful cage. Bon wrote again. To be loved for being pleasant is not to be loved. It is to be consumed, Nora said. So many people used to say, I need someone like you. But the moment I got weaker, I became just a shadow. She was always the one who arrived on time, nodded at the right moment, stayed silent at the right place. And in return, she was celebrated, invited, depended on, called the symbol of quiet strength and sacrifice. But no one ever asked, do you still feel like you're alive? Then Bon asked one last question. If you stopped being pleasant, who do you think would leave you first? Nora laughed. A soft, sorrowful laugh, but one that carried freedom. Maybe everyone, but maybe that's a good thing. Because the ones who stay will finally see me. That afternoon, Nora wrote in her journal, I've been well-liked my whole life, but now I want to try being real even just for one day and see if I still exist. Because there is a quiet kind of death when you are loved for the role you play, but never for the person you really are. The moment I stayed silent and never forgot. There are times we don't speak up, and then we live with the echo of that silence for the rest of our lives, Bon asked. Was there ever a moment you wish you'd said something but didn't? Nora didn't need time to think. She answered right away. Yes, and it's the heaviest thing I carry. It was 1987. At the school where Nora taught, a student was expelled because they discovered she was pregnant. Her name was Claire. 17, bright, sensitive. She once told Nora, you're the only one who makes me feel like I'm not dirty. When the news broke, everyone looked away. The principal called a meeting. Parents were furious, classmates went silent, and Nora, the one who could have spoken up, chose to stay quiet. I wanted to protect her, wanted to say she doesn't deserve to be expelled, wanted to say we could teach her how to raise a child, not erase her from school. But I stayed silent because I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of being accused of defending what wasn't proper. Bon asked, did Claire know you wanted to speak up? Nora shook her head, eyes blurred with tear. No, because I never told her. I just watched her walk out of the classroom holding her stomach with no one there to see her off. She bit her lip. I don't know how Claire's life turned out. All I know is that I was the one who didn't do anything, when I should have been the first to stand up. Bon didn't write, he just listened. Because some kinds of pain don't need analysis, only acknowledgement. Nora continued, I once watched my best friend get verbally humiliated by her husband at a party. Everyone laughed it off, and so did I, even though I felt sick inside. I once heard a black student get called a disgusting nickname and I didn't correct it. I once saw my daughter crying because she was being forced to study something she hated, and I told her, push through, you have to be good at it. I didn't stay silent just because I was afraid. I stayed silent because I had been trained to believe that speaking up only makes things worse. Bon asked, and what do you think now? Nora answered without hesitation. Now I believe silence is what rots everything from the inside out. A truthful voice might offend someone, but a wrong silence can kill a person's dignity for the rest of their life. That night, Nora wrote, I'm sorry not just to those I didn't defend, but to myself for teaching my own heart to believe that being kind means knowing when to be quiet. I was wrong, and today I admit it. From that moment on, Nora began to speak up, not to be forgiven, not to make amends, but to say to the old woman staring back at her in the mirror, I see you, I hear you, and I promise we won't be silent anymore. Bon asked, do you want to change? That morning it rained, but not the kind of rain that chills. It was soft, steady, the kind that feels like the world is being gently washed clean. Bon sat beside Nora in her small kitchen. No notebook, no questions, just tea and silence. Because today Bon didn't come to listen. Today he came to ask one question. Do you want to change? Nora looked up. The question sliced through the quiet like lightning through still water. She frowned. What do you mean by that? Bon was calm. I'm not asking if you regret. I'm not asking if it hurts. I'm asking from now until the end of your life. Do you want to live the rest of your days as your true self? Nora didn't answer right away. She turned to look at the wind chime hanging outside her porch. The bell rang softly, steady, honest. Do you really believe someone who's 81 can still change? Bond didn't hesitate. I believe someone who's 81 can start living real, and if not now, then when? Nora laughed. It was a laugh laced with both bitterness and defiance. I've played roles for so long. I don't even know if I have anything left that's still me. Bond stayed silent, didn't argue, didn't comfort. He simply said, maybe you don't need to live truly for any role at all. Just live truly for you. No one needs to understand. No one needs to agree, just you and the peace that comes when you close your eyes for the last time. Nora looked into Bond's eyes. For the first time, she saw someone who didn't see her as a sweet old lady, but as a human being. Standing before one last open door and being asked, do you want to walk through it? I don't know where to start, she whispered. I've been quiet for too long. If I speak now, people will be shocked. They might react. They might leave, Bond replied. Maybe, but what's even more painful is if you leave yourself again. Some people may leave us when we start living honestly, but parts of us die forever when we don't. Bond asked again, this time slowly, clearly. Do you want to live the rest of your life not just to keep the peace, but to be real even if no one understands? There was silence. Then Nora nodded. Slowly, very slowly, but surely. I don't know how many days I have left, but if I can, I want at least one of them to be mine. Not controlled, not graded, not applauded, just me and the voice inside me. Bond smiled gently. Then let's start today. You don't have to change the world, just change how you treat yourself. And on that damp morning, there was no miracle, no grand moment, just a quiet nod from a woman who had lived kindly her whole life, but for the first time chose to be kind to herself. A letter to myself. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. Nora sat alone in her quiet bedroom. No one called, no one interrupted, just another ordinary Thursday. But for her, this was the day she finally remembered her own name. On the table sat a brand new notebook, not a journal for daily thoughts. This one was for a letter. It wouldn't be mailed, no one would read it, no stamp, no address, no recipient, because the recipient was herself, but not 81-year-old pleasant Nora. This was for the girl Nora, age 12, 22, 37, 50, the one who screamed silently inside her own life and no one ever heard. She placed her hand on the blank page and began. Dear Nora, it's me, the woman you became. But today I'm not writing to say I'm proud. I'm writing to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. When Mom scolded you for drawing a picture that didn't meet her expectations, I didn't stand up. I just tore it up. When you wrote your first love letter, I burned it. Not because you were wrong, but because I was afraid others would see it. When you wanted to write to dream, to believe in something truly your own, I made you fold it all away. I didn't protect you because I chose to be accepted rather than to be true. Sweetheart, I turned you into the pleasant one, the one everybody liked, except herself. I'm sorry I made you believe if you stay quiet you'll be loved. I was wrong. And now sitting here at 81, I realize you never left. You didn't die. You just went quiet, waiting for the day I'd finally be brave enough to come back and hold you again. Today is that day, and if you're still somewhere inside me, please know this: I hear you now, and this time, I'm not running away. Nora set down her pen. Her hand trembled not from age, but from writing something so real without fearing how anyone might respond. She folded the letter, didn't tuck it in a drawer, just laid it on her lap, and looked out the window. Outside, children laughed. A lazy cat stretched in the sun, and the soft light of dusk kissed the edge of the bed like a gentle hand, brushing her shoulder. Bond walked in. He didn't ask, didn't need to read the letter. He saw Nora's face and knew something big had just been released. Nora looked at him and said softly, I used to think apologizing meant weakness, but now I know saying sorry to myself is the bravest thing I've ever done. Bond wrote in his notebook, you don't need the world to forgive you. You only need to stop sentencing yourself to silence. That evening, Nora fell asleep for the first time in her life, not feeling like she was performing. She lay down not as someone playing her part, but as someone finally returning to the soul she had abandoned for decades. No one came to hug her. No one sent a message saying, "I'm proud of you, Mom." But the miracle was she didn't need it anymore, because she had finally held the one part of herself that mattered most. Herself. One time I finally spoke up. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon. Nora's family had gathered to throw a small party to celebrate her 81st birthday. There were cakes, there were flowers, grandchildren running in circles, everyone smiling, taking photos, saying kind things. Everyone thought our grandma always strong, sweet, and doing just fine. Nora stood in the middle of the room, a glass of apple juice in hand, a gentle smile like every year. But this time there was something different in her eyes, no longer searching for approval, no longer holding herself together just to keep the peace. This was the gaze of someone who had sat with her soul long enough to know if she didn't say it today, she might leave this world without ever having been here. Bon stood in the corner of the room. He didn't interrupt, he just observed. He knew the moment was coming. Nora tapped her glass. The room fell silent. She smiled softly. "Thank you all for coming today. I'm grateful I'm still healthy enough to see all your faces. And today I'd like to say something I've never said before." No one moved. They just watched. She looked at each family member and then spoke gently but firmly. "All my life people have called me kind, thoughtful, pleasant, and I thank you for that. But because of it, I never dared to speak my truth and I lost precious parts of my life." The room went still. The background music faded beneath the weight of her words. "I once wanted to be a writer. I once loved a woman but never dared to say it. I once believed in a different kind of faith but didn't follow it. I stayed quiet when I saw injustice. I taught my child to fit society instead of listening to who she was. I said yes when all I wanted to scream was no." People looked around. Some were stunned. Some lowered their eyes. Some gave an awkward smile thinking maybe she was joking. But Nora didn't stop. "I'm not saying this to shock you. I'm saying this because I don't want to leave this world without ever giving myself the chance to be real." Bon pressed his lips together silently, etching a line in his memory. "Some voices don't shake the world, but they save a soul from disappearing." Nora glanced at her son, the one who never knew his mother once dreamed of writing. At her granddaughter who had never seen her cry. At her sister who once called her the one who never causes trouble. "I'm sorry for not living truthfully, but I also forgive myself because I was so afraid of being left behind." A long pause. Then her granddaughter stood up, walked over, and hugged her. "Grandma, I didn't know you carried so much, but I do know you don't have to carry it alone anymore." People started to clap, not for drama, not for performance, but because something real had just happened. For the first time, Nora didn't need to be sweet, didn't need to be praised, didn't need to be fine. She only needed to be heard. That evening, Bon asked, "How do you feel?" Nora smiled. "I don't know what they all think, but for the first time I wasn't acting. I stood in front of them and I was me." Bon wrote in his notebook, "Sometimes you don't need to be understood, you only need to know you lived honestly, even just once. Truth doesn't need to be proven, only released." The next morning the sky was clear, no harsh sunlight, no wild wind, just a light air, as if today was the first day Nora was truly living as herself. She poured tea, sat on the porch, and watched the sparrows fly by with no need for anyone's approval to take flight. Bon arrived as he usually did. But today his gaze was different. It wasn't the look of someone listening, but the look reserved for someone who had just done the hardest thing, to live honestly without fearing the cost. Nora spoke first. "You know, truth doesn't need agreement. It just needs to be let out like a bird from a cage." Bon nodded. He wrote in his notebook, "Some truths when hidden feel like an itch that never ends. But once released, they don't need to scream. They just need to breathe." Nora shared after her birthday a few relatives messaged her. No one argued, no one judged. Some simply said, "I don't understand it all, but I know you've lived long enough to have the right to say what you've kept inside." She smiled. I used to fear the truth would break everything. But in the end, it was the truth that kept me from breaking. She still went to church, still read books on meditation, still wrote, but not to prove anything to anyone, only to hold a gentle conversation between herself and her soul. Bon asked, "Do you have regrets?" Nora looked up at the sky. "Yes, but I no longer carry resentment. I lived too long in fear. Now, I just live in presence." One afternoon, she sat in the park. A young woman sat beside her, quiet. Nora spoke. "Have you ever been afraid to say what you really think?" The woman nodded. "Every day." Nora placed her hand gently on hers. "You can wait until you're 81 like I did, or you can begin now. Truth doesn't need an age, it only needs a heart brave enough not to need applause." That evening, Bon left. But before he did, he placed a note on the table. "No one else can live your life for you. But today you taught a whole generation how to live with themselves by saying the one thing no one ever dared say out loud." Nora read it, folded it, and placed it in a drawer, the same drawer where she once hid everything she never said. Now that drawer, it only holds what no longer needs hiding. And that is the greatest freedom. Not that everyone understands you, but that you have stopped hiding from yourself. On my last day, I was finally myself. That morning, Nora woke up early. No calls, no texts, no alarm ringing, no special reason to get up. And yet she rose, because today, she was no longer tired of living. She brewed a pot of lavender tea, set it on the table, poured it slowly into a small cup. Not for anyone, not for a photo, not to please. Just to take a sip as a quiet ceremony to welcome herself back to life. She sat on the porch, watched the leaves fall, listened to the wind chimes sing at the window. No words were needed. She was simply present, whole, real, unguarded. Bon arrived, brought nothing, no notebook, no pen. He just came to sit beside her in silence. Nora smiled, eyes gazing into the distance. "You know, I used to fear that my last day would come before I ever got to be truly myself. But today, if I were to leave, I'd go with a heart finally freed from its last layer of armor." Bon whispered, "If there were one thing you'd want the world to remember about you, what would it be?" Nora didn't hesitate. She didn't need to think. Her words came soft as the breeze. "That I lived kindly, and in the end, I finally lived truthfully." She stood, walked slowly back inside, picked up her very first journal where she used to write questions to herself. She gently crossed out a line. "Will I ever be brave enough to live honestly?" And beside it she wrote, "I was, and I did, thank you." That evening, Bon wrote the final entry in his own notebook. "We are not remembered because we were perfect. We are remembered because we dared to show up even if it was late." And Nora was one of those people. That night, Nora went to bed early. On her nightstand, there were no books on self-help, no to-do lists, no phone waiting for texts. Just one letter addressed to herself and a heart that no longer needed to perform. And if she didn't wake up tomorrow, people would say she passed peacefully. But only she would know. She left this world with no roles left to play. And that was the most beautiful freedom a soul can ever know. A whisper from the heart. If you're listening to this story and you see a piece of yourself in Nora, know this. It is never too late to live honestly. You don't need to shout. You don't need to rebel. You don't need to break someone's heart to be true to yours. You only need one thing. Sit with yourself and ask quietly but truthfully, am I still living in alignment with my truth? Because sometimes living honestly isn't a grand gesture. It's writing the line you were too afraid to write. It's saying no to what isn't right. It's crying when it hurts. It's hugging when it's needed. It's forgiving yourself for waiting so long to come home. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to The Life After 60. Because we're not here just to tell stories. We're here to help you remember the part of you you thought was lost forever. And remind you, it's still here, still waiting, still worth coming back to.